Hey everybody, how's it going? Marcos Villegas for Fight Up TV, powered by Stagefront VIP. Being joined with a special guest, Mr. Jim Lampley, Hall of Famer, overall, a staple, an important staple to us boxing fans, Jim. And I know you hear it time and time again, man, but we really, really miss you in the world of boxing, miss seeing you ringside. Like, honestly, last time I saw you was the last HBO broadcast. I was there for the Bracus fight, when you gave that touching monologue at the very end. Like, honestly, I still look at that monologue. I have it saved on my phone, actually. I was there right next to you. But, man, so good to see you. And I would imagine you miss being around the fights and doing all this stuff, huh?
Yeah, that was the last time I saw me too. So yes, I absolutely have missed being around boxing matches and boxing people. The best people in the world are fight fans, and I'm really looking forward to going to Las Vegas the weekend of September 30 to be there on behalf of ppv.com and chatting for fans, interacting with my great friend Lance Pugmire, wandering the halls of the MGM Grand. It'll be like old home week, I guess, to a certain degree, and an interesting new way to be a part of the big fight experience for me.
Yeah, like you mentioned, you're doing this interactive chat with ppv.com for the Canelo versus Charlo fight. And because you're doing it for this fight, just curious, what do you make of the actual matchup of Canelo versus Charlo, and Charlo coming up two weight classes to challenge for the undisputed titles at 168 pounds?
Well, that's the key fact I would have pointed to also in setting up the fight. If you're looking for a perspective from which to differentiate the two fighters, Canelo has fought, and effectively so, at 175 pounds. Big win over Sergey Kovalev at that weight, has succeeded at 168 pounds as well. And now Charlo prepares to go up 14 pounds. So that in itself would seem on the surface to be an advantage for Canelo. But of course, boxing is, as my dear friend Larry Merchant used to say, the theater of the unexpected. It's not open and shut. And you can expect Charlo to be younger, maybe more intensely motivated. Canelo's made a lot of money. He's had a long career, and it gets more and more difficult for even the most professional of fighters going toward the end of a career like that to keep going into the gym and putting out maximum effort every day. And one of the things I've always said about boxing is if you go into the gym for those 6 or 8 weeks before the fight and you're 1% less than what you used to be in terms of your commitment every day, then you might arrive at the ring 10 or 12% less than what you used to be. It's cumulative, it's ongoing. And who knows whether Canelo, with everything he's accomplished, with everything he's gained from the sport, is at that moment yet where motivation might begin to ebb away. We don't know. We don't know until he gets into the ring. If he's the Canelo who has been so vibrant and alive prior to the Bivol fight, then you got to make him a very solid favorite against Jermell Charlo. But if he's anything less than that, then that opens the door for the possibility of a younger, maybe more energetic on that night fighter to pull off a big win.
Curious, have you seen the last few fights of Canelo, like the Ryder fight and the Bivol fight? Because some have suggested, I don't know if fairly or not, that he does seem to be declining now, based on how he's looked in those fights.
Well, the Ryder fight is a fight against I think a demonstrably lesser opponent. And that's another thing that happens to veteran fighters like Canelo, is that they get deeper into the career and somewhere closer to the exit point, it's a little bit easier going to sleep at night and getting up in the morning and thinking, I can handle this guy. I mean, I've seen better fighters than him. And that can cut into the output of effort in the gym. I know nothing that leads me to believe that Canelo is going to be anything less than his best. He has always been a great trainer. He has always worked very hard to prepare for all his fights. But again, there comes a moment for all of them when it becomes a little bit more difficult to do that. He won the Ryder fight, as he was expected to do. And then there were still some ringside critics who said, the old Canelo would have gone through Ryder like water through a sieve. And that wasn't exactly what happened. So there were some less than 100% reviews for that. Bivol, that I think was a matchmaking mistake. That was just an error of believing that because he had beaten a perhaps somewhat on the other side of the fulcrum, Sergey Kovalev, that he could handle another Russian light heavyweight. But Bivol was longer, more athletic, probably a sounder boxer, going from A to Z than Sergey Kovalev. And it was a clear win for Bivol. It was just as I say, I believe that can be called a matchmaking error. And you get more prone to that kind of thing as your career goes on and you are more celebrated and glorified. And Canelo has been Mexico's #1 fighter for a long time. When you are Mexico's #1 fighter, you are representing the largest, most intense boxing clientele in the world. You've been treated to every privilege known to man. And again, how many times can you go into the gym and do the same thing that you did back in the day when you were hungry, trying to prove you were one of the best?
Yeah, it's just like that quote. It's hard to get up for fights when you're waking up in silk pajamas. I believe it was Hagler that said that long ago.
Foreman used to say it on our telecast.
Yeah,
I'm not sure who originated the quote, but yeah, and I've heard it referred to silk pajamas. I've heard it referred to satin sheets. But whatever way you say it, the basic message is the same. And yeah, when you're hungry coming up and you've never made a 7-figure purse, that's when you really dig down deep to try to get yourself to excuse me, a higher and higher level. Canelo's made a lot of 8-figure purses now. So where does it go from here?
Yeah, it's difficult. Like when I was looking at that Ryder situation, I thought, yeah, a guy the class of Canelo should be putting out someone like that within, the course of 12 rounds, just given his class and his skill. But the other part was thinking like, well, this is what happens when a guy like a Ryder, they level up on occasions like this. They get the most they can get out of themselves as opposed to another fight. And I thought, well, maybe it was that. Like at the end of the day, Canelo knocked him down and he beat him up. He broke his nose and knocked him down. And I think with this Charlo fight, I think both guys are going to really come 110%. But the question, I guess, will come to us, or the answer will come to us, where Canelo is at in his career. But when you look overall at the arc of his career, and this is actually a fan question that was brought into us for you, Jim, where would you rank him amongst the pantheon of the Mexican greats? Because I know he's already been thrown in there as one of the top Mexican fighters ever.
Well, there've been a lot of great ones, and we'll be talking about that on ppv.com going into the fight, obviously. And a lot of people with recent memories start out with Julio Cesar Chavez. We never saw the best of Salvador Sanchez. We don't know what he might have turned out to be with a longer career. And, some of the guys who preceded them, I didn't see. I saw Chavez from the early middle of his career on toward the end. I saw great Chavez, and then I saw Chavez who maybe had made a little too much money and whose desire in the gym had ebbed. He certainly wasn't the same fighter against Oscar De La Hoya that I saw early on against Jose Luis Ramirez and fighters like that. So, I think Canelo is one of the top 4 or 5 Mexican fighters ever. And I think that there's a huge nucleus of Mexican fans who would say he's certainly not #1 because they cling so passionately to the identities of the guys who came before him.
Yeah, but I also hear others like, look, he's accomplished the most out of any Mexican fighter ever, and the undisputed part at 168, that run that he had, where he knocked off Saunders and Plant to get those belts. They say like, hey, you can't deny him. No other Mexican fighter has done that, but eras are different. Harder to get to the belts in those eras as well. It certainly is different. Like back in Chavez's era, there's only one champion, and he was not some Mickey Mouse champion. He was the legit guy.
Well, I was working for a long time with a Mexican screenwriter, the great Guillermo Arriaga, trying to put together a television series about a Mexican American boxer. And one of the things I learned from Guillermo was that it's a hard climb for Canelo to become number one in the hearts of Mexican fans just because he's from a different place than what they feature as the heart of the heart. Marco Antonio Barrero was from Mexico City. Eric Morales was from Tijuana. If you're from Mexico City or Tijuana, you are in the hearts and minds of a lot of Mexican fans, a quote, real Mexican. A guy who's from the Yucatan, who grew up in Cancun, that's not as close to the heart of the heart. Chavez, of course, was from Sinaloa, and that's again very traditional, old world Mexican. So they look at things through their own filters, and some of those filters are aimed at not necessarily diminishing Canelo, but he has to clear a higher bar to get to the same level in their passions and their hearts. And I think you're 100% correct that if you look at it from the rational standpoint of what has he accomplished in what weight classes against what opponents, pretty hard to match it. He's done amazing things from lightweight all the way up to light heavyweight, and beating quality opponents everywhere along the way. Mayweather, who beat Mayweather? That was just a bridge too far, that particular assignment at that point in his career. Would he have had a better shot against Mayweather later on when Floyd had taken a little punishment? Well, the fact is, Floyd never took any punishment. Even Pacquiao didn't hit him, but maybe once or twice. So at the end of the day, it's very hard to measure Canelo in comparison to all the other great Mexican fighters. But you can make a case, and you made it, Marcos, that if it's just about accomplishments, how many points did you put on the board? Pretty hard to beat him.
Yeah. And that's the back and forth I always hear from boxing fans is that, and Chavez is like this sacred idol. He's like the Virgin Mary for the Mexican people. Like it's like no one can ever come close to him.
Because of the way he fought, because he was a face first brawler. Basically, he had boxing skills and he could use them. But at the end of the day, it was about getting close to you and hitting you with that left hook to the liver. That was how he was going to win the fight. And, not for nothing did they call it the Mexican liver shot. It's the defining punch for a lot of guys who come from that culture. And it's what the crowd wants to see. They want to see a guy who will risk himself by getting inside of the other fighter's punching range and delivering punishment. And that's what Chavez did.
Oh, yeah. And, very underrated defense, too, as well. Like when you really analyze his fights and his waist movement, the way he was able to slip punches and moving his waist coming into fights, like I feel like he doesn't get enough credit for the defense that he had.
Natural born fighter. Yeah. Grew up doing it, knew what he was doing all the time. And until his physical gifts began to diminish, as is inevitable in the sport, he was very hard to beat in a lot of different ways.
What do you make of Gervonta Davis and the way that he's fought out his career at this point? And is it likely we see him as an all-time great?
Well, he's got to eliminate and get past outside the ring distractions. And he's had more than one outside the ring distractions. And he's clearly, with that body, he's in the process of making his way up the weight scale, and he might go up one or two more classes before we have seen him settle at his most effective weight. And every time you go up in weight, you're facing guys who can, if they want to, hit a little harder. And the risk goes up. That's why fighting heavyweights is what it is. So let's see how many weight classes Gervonta Davis goes up. What kind of fighters does he fight when he gets up there? Okay, so is Terence Crawford still at 147 or 154 when Gervonta Davis gets up there? Terence Crawford is a very gifted, hard-hitting counterpuncher of the kind that I'm not sure Davis has seen so far. So, I'm not ready to draw a full-scale evaluation of who he is and what he can do until he settles at an effective weight and shows us this is where I'm going to plant my flag.
Yeah, it's crazy, dude, to hear Terence now change his tune and say he would go up to 168 to fight Canelo, which blows my mind, but it shows you the type of competitor that he is. And
I think that might be a bridge too far, but yes, that's the kind of competitor he is. And he's a tiny bit younger than Canelo. So maybe he thinks he'd have an advantage.
No, I think he's older than Canelo.
Is he?
Yeah, I think
well,
Terence is what, 36,
okay.
37.
He's older, but he's had fewer fights.
Yes.
I'm right in one way, all right? Yeah.
Jim, I would imagine the number one question that you get is HBO coming back, or are you coming back to commentate? Is any of that stuff likely ever?
I think most people now understand that HBO isn't coming back. HBO was bought by a cell phone sales organization from Dallas, which had no particular interest in continuing boxing for whatever reason. And that was functionally, up to now, my exit from the sport. I don't know the reason for that. I couldn't possibly tell you, because I don't know the reason why I haven't gotten a quality offer from a streaming service or a cable network or any other distributor to call a fight. But of course, I'm 74 years old. So, you can't expect everything to go your way forever. And I was almost 70 at the moment when I was actually 70. I was 70 years old when HBO Boxing came to an end. So, regardless of whether I thought I was capable and ready to go forward calling fights, that hasn't happened. So other people, and I respect all of them, do the ringside part of it. And now I'm going to go put myself into the editorial flow of a fight with an entirely different platform, working with Lance Pugmire on ppv.com, and very excited about communicating that way.
I just feel like your insight is severely missed in your perspective, especially, after the fights, when you give your take, your piece on everything like that. I think that's something that's been missing for the longest time.
Well, for 4 years, if that's your point of view, but again, I don't make that decisions. Unfortunately for me, you don't make those decisions, and so no opportunity to continue doing television commentary on boxing has arisen until electronic communication, online, ppv.com, what I'm about to do with Lance Pugmire. That's the great chance now.
So I'm going to give you some, some warm up on answering fan questions. I got a bunch of fan questions asked in, and I'm just going to go throw a few at you from our fan base. And at Robert Jimenez 688 asks you, Jim, what's your current pound for pound list?
I wouldn't tell him that I have a current pound for pound list, because I haven't been sitting ringside. So I couldn't honestly say that I can tell you for sure who's number one pound for pound, but at this moment, you pin me to the wall, I have to say Terence Crawford. I did get some credit from the great Tom Hauser, because I told Hauser 2 days before Crawford Spence, when most of the world was saying this is a pick'em fight, I said, I don't think it is a pick'em fight. I think that Crawford has a significant advantage in background and in competitive psychology, and it wouldn't shock me if Spence needs a rescue late in the fight, and that wound up happening. So Hauser patted me on the back for it. So Crawford won, Inoue 2, and from that point forward, there are a lot of fighters to consider, including, even though it's pound for pound we're talking about, you gotta look at Tyson Fury. I mean, who is harder to beat than Tyson Fury, given all of his physical qualities and his tactical qualities? I find it very hard to envision or imagine who can beat Tyson Fury, and I think in the long course of history, it's pretty hard to figure out. He's 6 feet 9 inches tall. He has arms that are longer than that profile. His initial instinct in the ring is to defend himself. He's a backup counterpuncher who can punch your lights out. I mean, all of those things put together, Fury's got to be in the top 5 pound for pound.
Shakur Stevenson did a quote about Fury saying like Fury would have beaten Ali, and he got a lot of shtick for it. But he said, look how big this guy is. Like,
exactly,
look how big these other heavyweights were.
Exactly the point. I was at dinner with Emmanuel Stewart in Las Vegas many years ago. And Emmanuel was my closest adult male friend, very close with him. And I looked across the table. I said, Emmanuel, I've heard that you are working in the gym with Tyson Fury. He said, that's true. I've brought him to Detroit, to Gronk. And I said, why in the world are you interested in Tyson Fury? He looks to me like a clumsy oaf. And Emmanuel put his fork down and he said, Jimbo, he's going to be the heavyweight champion of the world, and there's absolutely no doubt about it. Look at his height, look at his arm length, look at his basic defensive backup instincts in the ring, look at how much power he's going to be able to generate when he decides and makes the commitment to go forward and hit people with all his weight, et cetera, et cetera. Not only is he going to be heavyweight champion, and there's no doubt about it, he might be an unbeatable and unbeaten heavyweight champion. Emmanuel said that to me many years ago. Look at Tyson Fury. Tell me he's not an unbeaten and unbeatable heavyweight champion at this point on this planet.
Yeah, it's just given his physical gifts, it's very hard to match him up against anybody, and him not being the winner. But people do say
history. In history.
In history, yeah.
You can say Marciano would have a chance against him.
Marciano was tiny.
Say Jack Dempsey would have a chance against him. These are great, great fighters. They would look like flies in there against Tyson Fury. Ali and Lennox Lewis are the two fighters whom most of the intelligent critics I've spoken to ultimately settle on. Well, Lennox would have the power and Ali would have the instincts and the defensive skills and stuff like that. Yeah, I agree. Those would be interesting fights. But would you get me to say there's no way that Tyson Fury could beat Muhammad Ali or Lennox Lewis? I'm not in that bag. He would have a chance, and against anybody who ever lived.
What about Usyk, the man that's fighting this weekend? Does he stand a chance against him?
It's a great matchup, and you might say if there's anybody who can bother Fury, it's a much smaller, skilled counterpuncher. So Usyk is a much smaller, very skilled counterpuncher. He'll be quicker than Tyson. He might be able to dart in and out. He'll employ side-to-side movement, make himself a tougher target than Tyson has faced with the come-forward Deontay Wilder. There are lots of possibilities in that fight, and I'm not totally shocked, although Emmanuel might, roll in his grave. I'm not totally shocked if Usyk gets a win against him, but that's going to come down to scoring. He's not going to knock him out. That's going to be judges picking rounds to give to Usyk, and it will be an argument in their minds because Tyson will land the bigger shots.
Yeah, that was actually a fan question that brought in, but with added context to it as, what do you think about the heavyweights? We've seen all these other guys make fights. What do you think about the heavyweights not fighting each other, particularly Fury and Usyk not being able to fight yet, and we're seeing now Fury against Ngannou?
Well, Fury against Ngannou is too bad. I'm not a fan of boxers versus MMA guys, But of course, the world has changed. Most boxing fans these days are also fans of MMA. That's one of the ways in which I am old-fashioned and perhaps over the hill, because I've never paid constant attention and developed a fan perspective on MMA. I don't know what Ngannou's chances are. I start from the perspective that I used when I was talking to fans about Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor. It's two different sports. They are two different skill sets. So when MMA guys come into the ring to fight boxers with boxing rules, they're up against it. The boxing rules are set up to favor the way the boxer fights, and the boxer's skills are honed in relation to boxing rules, and MMA is different. So, a boxing pad, the ring surface is, from my understanding, softer than MMA. Because there's a cushier, plusher pad there, Mayweather knew that if he allowed Conor McGregor to throw and maybe even land a little bit in the early rounds, he could tire him out faster. McGregor was exhausted by the end of that fight. So, boxers are smart. They find every edge they can find. And I tend to believe that Fury has those kinds of edges against Ngannou.
You've been an observer of the sport now. What can you tell us about overall the state of boxing at this point?
So I would have to say that, and ppv.com is illustrative of this, I think we're in a transitional period with regard to the transmission and delivery of the sport. There was a long period of time when boxing television stabilized as a commercial network entity. Friday Night Fights, sponsored by Gillette, Don Dunphy calling the fights. That was my initial orientation to boxing. ABC Sports, Saturday afternoon, Wide World of Sports, Howard Cosell calling the fights. That was a functional paradigm for a long time. And then I started calling fights on ABC Sports at the beginning portion of Mike Tyson's career, called his first several network television exposures on ABC, and representative of what was happening in the sport at that time. He was presented with a bigger economic opportunity by HBO. And I think it was really HBO signing Tyson that solidified the dominance of premium pay cable distributors, meaning HBO and Showtime, in the boxing space. And for a long time, that was where you got the fights. And now you have streaming services. You still have Showtime. You don't have HBO anymore. That's why I haven't called a fight in 4+ years. And you don't have commercial network television coverage of boxing anymore. So the fights are a little bit more of a challenge to find. And the economic base is no longer about attracting the broadest possible audience. It's more about targeting the most interested audience and squeezing them for the $20 or $30 fee, or the year-long subscription, or whatever economic formula it is that delivers the money. And that is still shaking out. It's, as I say, a transitional period. And, we don't know where the next golden era is going to be housed. And all of this really began with Ali Frazier won 1971, which was the first massive, overwhelming public interest pay-per-view, and dramatically altered the economic horizons of the sport. And since that time, everything has been taking stepping stones across the water and changing as the distribution pattern continues to evolve technologically, promotionally, et cetera, to wherever it is we're going to go next.
Do you feel the health of the sport is in a good place, given the fights we've seen this year?
What is it Larry Merchant said? Boxing, can't describe it, can't explain it, can't kill it, something like that. There's never a moment when you look at boxing and say, totally healthy, completely stable. This is a great sport, nothing to worry about. That's not the nature of the beast. And the nature of the beast is that boxing will always grapple with certain kinds of obstacles on the way to achieving what it achieves. But the boxing audience is passionate, committed, devoted, as much so as any audience for any sport. If there's a great fight, which is going to take place somehow, somewhere, the boxing fans are going to find it and flock to it. And I don't want to say regardless of what it costs, but even at extremely high cost. I remember years before 2015, in the last 2 or 3 years before 2015, people repeatedly, hundreds of them in some weeks, would stop me on the street. When am I going to see Mayweather Pacquiao? When am I going to see Mayweather Pacquiao? And over, I would say, what is it you think you're going to see? Why is it that you are so interested in this? Have you ever seen a Floyd Mayweather fight? And there was this massive mythification that no, this is going to be the great fight. The one in which Floyd is actually threatened and stretched to the limit. Well, of course, Floyd knew what he was doing. Floyd, knew the timetable. Floyd understood the kind of price that Pacquiao paid over and over and over to be the kind of fighter that he was. And Floyd went in and fought a low contact fight as expected, cleaned him up. There was practically nothing exciting that happened. And I walked out of the arena saying, okay, you paid $20,000 for a ticket so you could go on social media and say, look, I was here. I hope that was enough for you, because that was, by and large, the big reward. So, we go through things like that. We get past them, and then you get to Canelo Golovkin 1 and 2. Two of the greatest fights you could ever possibly see. Almost impossible to pick a winner. High contact all the way. That's what boxing fans most adore and most want to see. They want to see two guys go into the furnace and fight to see who comes out without a burn.
It's interesting you bring up that
those
fight.
Were the fights that typified that.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up those two fights because, it was the fights, but then also they were kind of marred with a little bit of controversy given the judges. And it's like, it's the best, but then it also shows the one of the bad things about the sport too,
So how unusual is that? I mean, how many times do you think everybody agreed with the decisions in Barrera Morales 1, 2, 3? There was no massive agreement with the decisions in Canelo 1 and Canelo Golovkin 1 and 2 because they're impossible fights to score. I don't care how good a judge you are. And, people criticize judges to me. People tell me, oh, judges are horrible, da-da-da-da-da. And I've, for 20 years now or more, I've said, try it. Sit down sometime with a pencil and a paper and recognize that as soon as the bell sounds and the round is over, you've got to write a name and you got to do it within 5 seconds and hand it to the referee as he comes around the ring. You got to make that decision. So if you made that decision with 15 seconds to go in the round and the guy that you're not picking to win the round landed 3 sudden left hooks in those last 15 seconds, what are you going to do? It is very, very difficult to score fights. And I have criticized judges as much as anybody. Pacquiao Bradley won. I was ruthless in my criticism of Las Vegas judges. On a few occasions, more than one, when an Eastern European fighter didn't get what I thought was a fair shake from Las Vegas judges, I expressed all that. But at the end of the day, a lot of those judges are my friends, and I would say to them, as I say to fans, hardest job in the world. Anybody who thinks they can do it better than you guys can do it probably hasn't really tried it.
Yeah, it's a tough job, that's for sure. And it's subjective. It's so subjective based on what you're looking at. But it's also like the biggest gripe you hear from fans. Like, well, how is it after all this time they can't get it right? Like, how is it that they're inept at their jobs and we keep seeing this happen to fighters that are deserving of these fights, and you see them suffer for the incompetence of the judges?
It's terrible. But what other solution is there? Boxing, can't love it, can't kill it. Yeah, it just is what it is, and it will never be perfect. And one of the ironic things about boxing, but you've seen it time and again, is that sometimes the great fight that elicits what the public decides is a bad decision, that stays around for a lot longer and has a far greater after effect than the great fight that elicits the decision that everyone expected. So on we go. I mean, the public, a massive amount of the public didn't want to believe that Joe Frazier beat Muhammad Ali in the first fight. Now, I don't think it's a wildly difficult fight to score, but until Frazier knocks Ali down in the 15th round, it's not in any way an easy fight to score. But that's a 2-point round in what was essentially a 1-point fight either way. And when that happens, you've managed to figure out who was the winner of the fight.
Finally, a lot of people ask this too. What is the best fight you ever called, the most memorable fight you ever called in all your time of broadcasting?
So I'll pick. I mean, there are many. There are tons of them, but I'll start with Gaddy Ward 1, which is the one more fans come to me about than any other, and I'll go to what I think was an even better fight, Barrera Morales 1, and then there are 15 others beyond that, including Canelo Golovkin 1 and 2. They're both on the list. So quite a number of them. What's the most memorable moment? That's easy. George Foreman knocking out Michael Moore. He was my expert commentator at the time, and that's my most remembered call. It happened. And that call was not planned. It was an accident because I had, for months, I had sat at ringside in the build-up to fights, sitting with George in casual, quiet moments, and many times I would lean in and say, George, how are you going to catch Moore? How are you going to find Moore? Holyfield couldn't find him. He's a southpaw. He's a mover. He has a knack for an elusive style, and he can whack a little bit. What's your plan for beating Michael Moore? And many times, like maybe 8 or 10 times, George would lean over to me quietly and say, Jim, you watch. There'll come a moment in the late rounds when he will come and stand in front of me and let me knock him out. And those were the words that stayed in my mind. And as Joe Cortez was counting over Moore, I was sitting there thinking, why the hell did I not think of this and author a line last night? Why did I not come up with, do you believe in miracles, or something that is the absolute perfect capsule line for this? Because I just refused to think that it was going to play out exactly the way George said it would play out. And I'm sitting there thinking that, why did I not think of a line? And I realized over and over he had told me, he's going to come and stand in front of me and let me knock him out. And what came out was, it happened. It happened. And then the summary about 20 years ago, Zaire, et cetera, he got back, But it happened was purely spontaneous in response to me remembering everything that George had said to me that I had discounted in the months leading up to the fight.
That moment's so inspirational to me, like now as an older person. I think when I saw that, I was young, I was just like a teenager, but now that I see it, and then when he said like, hey, age isn't a death sentence, and I see, what Bernard accomplished also at his age, it's like very inspirational. But for some reason, George doing that, even now, like when I look at it and look at the post-fight, like I'll go on YouTube and look at the post-fight speech, it hits me differently. I don't know why.
You bring up Bernard, who also, yes, accomplished amazing things past the age of 40. And the analogy I would draw between Bernard and George is, George was an underrated boxer. People don't pay enough attention to his mastery of the craft. He was disciplined. He worked hard in the gym. He mastered his craft. One night I said to George, George, show me how you throw a jab. He said, which one? I said, what do you mean? He says, I've got 4 of them. All right. And he showed me all 4 jab techniques, the purpose that they served, the difference in the outcome if he happened to land the punch. And that was my first reminder that George Foreman was no pure slugger with nothing else on his menu other than to land that big right hand shot. He had many different elements and was smart. People say, George Foreman, how smart? Look at the bank account. All right, that's all you need to know. He was a genius. Hopkins, astonishing mastery of tactics, strategy, how to establish his edges and make them dominant in the ring. The things he did to Tarver, Pavlik, I didn't think were possible, and demonstrated that, you know, age is not a factor if you have superior craft.
Very, very true. Jim, I could talk to you on hours on end. I have so many questions just as a fan of the sport and an observer as well, but I don't want to take up your whole afternoon either. So I'm appreciative of the time that I did have with you here. And I really do honestly look forward to seeing you during the fight week. And I think
or reading my chat comments on TV.
Yeah, well, I really think that you'll probably get emotional, the response you get from fans seeing you during that week. So I would imagine just be prepared for that.
Well, I'm going to get to Vegas Tuesday night. I'm going to be strolling the halls of the MGM Grand Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So I do expect to run into quite a number of fans who will say, where have you been? I do think that could happen, might happen while I'm there.
Yes, that is Jim Lampley. He will be a part of this ppv.com Canelo versus Charlo live interactive chat that they're putting on for this fight September 30th. Jim, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
My privilege, Marcos. Thank you.